Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Sheeba Rahman, and we talk about her work with families. We discuss family dynamics and her work with women and her interest in women's health. And she shares a lot of wisdom, and I really hope that you find this podcast a useful one. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sheeba Rahman. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Mindful Muslim podcast. How are you?
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me. I'm good. Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Brilliant. It's really an honor to have you on the podcast. Thanks for asking. It would be great if you could please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work. I know that you're a psychiatrist by profession. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. So I am a psychiatrist by profession. I am in the United States. So basically, I'm a medical doctor specialized in the field of psychiatry. So I treat all different kinds of mental illness, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia, personality disorders. So my training, I basically went to 4 years of undergrad, majored in biochemistry. Then I went to medical school for 4 years, and then I did a 4-year residency training to specialize in psychiatry.
Amazing. I feel like you can imagine that some people, definitely myself, sometimes get confused between psychiatry and psychology. So can you tell us the difference between those two?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that happens very often. So I would love to differentiate the two. So, as I said, as a psychiatrist, I went to medical school. So I have a medical background, and then I specialized in the field of psychiatry, which is behavior science, mental health, all of that, versus psychology, where, perhaps the background is more behavioral science and not as much medical in nature, where psychologists don't necessarily prescribe medications. So for myself as a psychiatrist, I make an assessment based on a biological background of the patient, as well as the genetics that are involved, and then the psychological nature of things as well. So oftentimes we treat with, along with therapy, we treat with medications as well. So there is a difference between psychologists and psychiatrists have a little bit more of or definitely a lot more medical background in nature.
Understood. And so, can we delve a little bit into your day to day at the moment? What does work look like for you? Say, I guess you work Monday to Friday.
I actually work Monday through Thursday. I try to take Fridays easy, not the too easy. I usually have meetings on Fridays, but Monday through Thursday, normally I start my day pretty early. I start seeing patients at about 8 in the morning, and then I work till about 4 or 5 in the evening. And I work predominantly virtually. So I see patients out of state. I'm located in Florida, but I see a lot of my patients out of state, and they either come into a clinic or they are in their own home or in their own office setting. And I'm usually in my office, and I see them on screen, and that's how my day starts. And a typical day consists of anywhere between 10 to 12 patients at least. And the common disorders that I see day to day are depression and anxiety. So I'm treating mainly what we call in the outpatient environment, people who are a little bit more stable. They don't necessarily need hospitalization at the time. And I'm trying to kind of maintain where they're at in terms of stability with their mental status.
So you mentioned the clinic and also that you work with patients virtually. So what's the setting for you like? Do you go into a hospital to do this?
I don't. I used to do that many years ago where I worked right after my training. I did a lot of hospital work for 2 years, in fact, where patients would come into the emergency room and then you determine whether they need to be hospitalized or not. Or if they do need to be hospitalized, I would admit them to the hospital and then treat them, stabilize them, and discharge them. So I did that for quite some time. And then I transitioned into what we call the clinic environment, where patients come in at their own discretion. They schedule and make an appointment, and they come in for their, their monthly or, annual med checks, whatever they need based on their needs. So it's more of a clinic setting. It's a little bit different from the hospital setting. So I don't work out of the hospital anymore. I work mainly in the clinic setting. And like I said, patients can either dial in virtually, where they're in their own home, or they go into a clinic, they get their blood pressure, all that good stuff checked, and then they go into an office, and then they'll see me on screen.
All right, all right, I understand. And that leads me nicely on to actually just further questions about your own career and when or how long you've actually been qualified and doing this kind of work.
I have been doing this kind of work since 2008. That's when I started. That's when I started psychiatry. So I'm well over the 10-year mark now.
Oh, fantastic.
So I've been doing psychiatry for quite some time. I've been practicing psychiatry, and I enjoy it more and more every year, thankfully. It's
Amazing.
not an easy job, but it's definitely something I've been passionate about all my life. I always
Mm.
knew I wanted to become a doctor. I didn't know I wanted to become a psychiatrist until I was introduced to it in medical school. And that's when I realized it's such an important field. And so, yeah, I've been doing this well over 10 years now. Alhamdulillah.
Amazing, amazing. Is that really where the inspiration came from? Where sort of you're on the course and it's the teaching aspect, or was there anything personal to you that kind of led you down that path?
I, as a medical student, did research in basically I did research and in a university, like in a hospital setting, and the research was on patients that were having seizures, and the seizures were not necessarily epileptic seizures. They were what we call psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. So they were related more to the mental health aspect versus seeing the seizure happen on an EEG, which is how the seizure is monitored, the electrical activity of the brain. So you don't necessarily see that a seizure is happening on an EEG, but you see physically the manifestations of a seizure. And so that was kind of my first experience doing research in the field. And so it was more psychiatry versus neurology, and that's where it started.
I'm really excited to just kind of delve in and probe your brain about all of the experience that you've had. As you say, it's more than 10 years that you've been in this field. So one of the things that I really wanted to ask you was family dynamics. It's kind of a term that has been used quite a lot, and I wondered if you could explain to us what that means to you as a psychiatrist, family dynamics.
Sure. Well, family dynamics is a very hot topic, as you know. And what happens a lot of times when people come in with depression and anxiety, we try to explore with them what are some of the reasons why they could be depressed, and what are some things that are triggers for them, and what are some stressors, or what are some factors that make people feel better when they're depressed or when they're anxious. And a
Mm,
lot of times we realize that the family dynamics play a role in how you feel and how you function on a day-to-day basis. And what family dynamics basically means is how you interact with people in your family, your mother, your father, your siblings, so anybody you're related to, closely related to, how you interact with them. And that is dynamic, meaning it changes from day to day, week to week, year to year. So it's not always the same. And so sometimes people can have certain family members that trigger them and can potentially make them, you know, elicit certain responses emotionally. And sometimes it could be the other way around, where people have a very supportive and a sound, stable family, and that can be a protective factor in their treatment. So the families actually do play a role, because a lot of times we're looking for, do you have a support system or not? Is there someone that you can go home to and rely on or depend on? Do you have emotional support or not? So that plays an important role. So for me, that's become a very important subject of interest, because in our community in particular, there's a very strong sense of family. And therefore, I like to educate the community about family dynamics and how to create, maintain, and sustain a healthy family dynamic.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier a little bit about some of the conditions or mental health challenges that you've come across and patients that you've had and worked with. What are, can you kind of keep going into that and tell us a little bit more about other things that you've seen? And I'm assuming you also don't predominantly work with the Muslim community, right?
No, I work with everybody. I don't only work with one specific patient
Well,
population.
well,
The only criteria that I have is really age criteria, is that I see adults. I don't prescribe to children. I
mm,
prescribe to adults only in terms of medication. So yeah, I don't just see one particular demographic. It's kind of open to anyone. But the common disorders that I see in the clinic setting is major depression, generalized anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. So, the most common of those being generalized anxiety, major depression, and post-traumatic stress. So those are really the most common ones. I don't go a day without seeing that. Let's put it that way.
absolutely. And across your career and the time that you spent doing this work, have you found that that's changed? Are there any trends, anything that you've noticed?
The trends change from time to time, sure. I think right now, social media has an impact on anxiety and depression as well, because what's happening is a lot of people are preoccupied with something that they have very, very easy access to. So, and there's not necessarily any limits to how much access they have. So there used to be a time where people had scheduled timing to watch the news or scheduled timing to watch a television show that they liked, scheduled timing for sports. And if you had an activity scheduled, you missed that, or you recorded at home. And now whatever it is, you have easy access to it day and night, literally. And so people can easily get preoccupied with that. There's a lot of changes in self image that have happened because there's so many images within seconds and minutes that you can compare yourself to. And so that's also affecting people's level of anxiety and depression.
I'm interested in the fact that you've brought up social media. You know, something that kind of came to the forefront of your mind. Does that mean that you could share some either kind of, I don't know, precautionary methods or tools or other kind of things that your patients or you've recommended to patients before in terms of handling social media in their lives?
Certainly. Yeah, it's really important because like I said, it's easy access, and a lot of times, believe it or not, that's the first thing people look at in the morning. That's
Mm,
the last thing people look at before they go to sleep. In the
mm,
middle of the night, if they wake up, they'll check their phone. It's addictive in nature, right? So there are a few techniques that I recommend to people very, very frequently. Number one is that you have to have it scheduled. You have to have your social media timing scheduled. You have to say, from this time to this time, I am not going to look at social media. When I
mm,
wake up first thing in the morning, I'm going to have a routine to get up and do this, this, and this, and not look at social media. Before I go to sleep, I'm not going to look at social media 3 hours before I go to sleep. You see,
mm,
so you kind of have to set limits and
mm,
schedule social media timing. And if you're a parent, you really have to watch and monitor what your kids are looking at and what they're not able to see and not able to see. So I always tell people you have to schedule your social media time. And if you feel like, okay, it's work related or whatever it is, you still have to say, these are my hours. These are
mm,
my hours. I'm going to set limits. And these few hours are my personal time. They're me time. These few hours are my family time. So you really have to compartmentalize your social media time because it's not necessarily all bad. It's not all negative. It's very educational. There's a lot of good things that, there's a lot of ways to connect to people and communicate with people. So I don't really see social media as a bad thing unless
mm.
you're getting addicted to it. unless you're using it to a point that it's affecting your mental health in a negative way. So you
Mm.
kind of have to set limits on yourself. So you have to schedule it. And you have to discipline yourself and say, nope, this time I'm not going to look at it.
I wonder, Shiba, have you ever had patients where perhaps you think that there may be something going on in terms of the use of social media for that person, or like the addictive nature that you mentioned, but they are finding it difficult to see that as well in themselves?
Yeah, and I think that happens in particular, lately what's been happening is that there is a comparison that people are making for themselves, right? Whether it's their body image, whether it's where they're at in their career, whether it's where they're at in their personal life, they are comparing themselves to other people's images. So again, the culture has shifted because there used to be a time where people had albums, photo albums, right? Where you can, it's a very personal thing. You have family photos and you only share that with people who are able to come to your home and see those photographs. But
Mm.
now all those images that you take are on the phone and they're on social media and they're for everyone to see, right? And so when your people are looking at these images, they're comparing their life now to somebody else's life. Okay, so this person got married in such and such a place, and they had these kinds of wedding favors. And again, from a creative perspective, it's a good thing because you get ideas. But there are some people, especially if you're predisposed to depression, anxiety, or even if you're not, it can put you in a state of, well, I should have done that, or I could have done that, and why didn't I do that? Or so you have to be mindful of how your brain is processing all of these images. And
Mm.
so a lot of time the youth especially, they don't realize it. They'll get anxious. I have this exam and I've been studying, and someone in my class is on vacation and they've passed this exam already. So immediately now, instead of focusing on the exam, they're shifting their attention on what
Mm.
the other person has already accomplished because of those images. So we didn't, for a time when social media didn't exist, you didn't have the ability to do that where you're constantly comparing yourself to other people.
Mm.
Now it's all literally at your fingertips.
Mm. Mm. I can imagine sometimes it can be hard to actually know, yes, I'm using social media too much, or admitting perhaps that, yes, I'm, using social media, like you said, 3 hours before I go to sleep. I think there's a certain point where we have to acknowledge that this is unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of times it affects your attention span because what's happening is the duration of some of the videos is short. So you're only attentive for a few seconds and then you're like swipe up, down, right, left, whatever. So your ability to stay attentive towards one thing is changing as well because now you're getting used to a message that's given to you within seconds and then it changes and then it changes again and then it changes again. So you easily get distracted or bored or whatever you want to call it, and your
Mm.
mind wants to say, oh, show me the next image, just show me the next image. And so you don't realize it because it's happening unconsciously, it's just happening so quickly. And so a lot of times you have to bring to your attention, like, how much time did I spend
Mm.
today,
Mm.
and can I limit this or not? And I have patients that tell me I spent this many hours
Mm.
just scrolling up and down. They have those little short videos that they keep going. And it's not necessarily negative messages, it's just distracting them from the actual tasks that they have to accomplish in that day.
Mm. Absolutely, absolutely. I'd like to stay on the theme of family and family dynamics. And another thing that I'd like to ask you about is gender norms within a family dynamic, and what you found in terms of um, certain beliefs that we have around that, and how it really kind of affects families.
Okay. Well, I think the gender norms, depending on which ethnicity or which cultural background you're from, they've changed over time. That
Mm.
so for example, when I was growing up, my mom was a housewife, and that was completely acceptable. But now, for myself, my sisters, that my upbringing has been that we're all professionals and career women. And
Mm,
so there has been a shift from personally from when I was growing up to now, where, I wasn't necessarily surrounded by women who were professionals. And now I am, because I studied for many, many years, and so did my family members and a lot of my friends and colleagues, of course. But when I was growing up, that was not necessarily the norm, at least for me. So in terms of the family structure, things have changed because, for example, a lot of women now are becoming high, going towards the path of education, and there's not necessarily that set expectation. At this age you have to get married, at this
mm,
age you have to do this and that,
mm,
because sometimes becoming a professional takes years, and it doesn't necessarily happen at age 21. So you have to make some compromises and sacrifices to be able to attain that level of education. So I am noticing a trend that people are very much pro education now, and
mm,
that trend has changed. And that may not be the case for everyone. That may just be my own background, my own personal background, where I didn't necessarily grow up with that. There may be people who were back in the day where everyone in their family was a doctor or a lawyer, but that for me is the change that I've noticed. And so a lot of times in families, if someone wants to go to that level of education and spend years and years, really they do need the family support sometimes, right? They need their mom or their dad or their siblings to say, okay, we're okay with this. Because if they say, no, we don't want you to do this, now you're going through two struggles. One, you're trying to attain something that's already difficult to attain, but two, you're going against your family. So in your
mm,
mind, you're doing something that's against the norm. So the family support goes a long way. Your family can either say, yeah, we've got your back, we're going to be your cheerleaders, you can do this, or really, you shouldn't be doing this, we expect you to do something completely different. You see what
mm,
I mean?
mm.
So the family really plays a huge role in who you eventually become.
Absolutely. I wonder if just kind of as well as that, that you would agree in the fact that that we still are living in a patriarchal society, and whether those kind of notions are feeding into family life and family dynamics still.
So, I mean, I wonder if we live in a patriarchal society or not, right? That's a little bit subjective and it's open to debate, because some may think that especially South Asian culture is matriarchal in nature, and I'll give you an example. Let's imagine a couple gets married, and in the couple the husband works, and the woman is the wife is at home, and she doesn't have many rights in the new family in which she's married into. Let's imagine, okay? And then she eventually gives birth to a son. And now she becomes a very important figure in that family, because she's brought to this family the first grandchild and the first grandson. So now the position has changed, right? And so now that mother is in a position of power,
Yeah.
and the son is indebted to his mom, right? Because she has brought him to this world, and the whole family feels, okay, this is the because of her we have our first grandson. And so now the son eventually gets married, and the son feels, whoever he marries, that you must make sure that my mother is happy, right? So that makes the family dynamic there matriarchal, right?
Mm,
Because the mother has a position of power, because she's the one who's brought the grandchild into their life, right? Into the in-laws' life, and she's raised the son. And so that now shifts into a matriarchal society. So
mm,
a lot of culturally, what I've noticed, a lot of families are actually matriarchal in nature. It's really
mm,
the mother who has the final say. Not all of them. Again, I don't want this to be a generalization. There are some families that are patriarchal in nature where what the father says, that's it. Whatever he says, that goes, right? So it's different from individual families. It can vary. So it can be patriarchal or matriarchal depending on the dynamic in your own family. So there are matriarchal families in our culture, and that's been ongoing. And then there are also patriarchal family. I think I've personally, again, come from a very matriarchal background where I've seen my father has a lot of aunts and he's always looked up to them, and he's had a relationship with his my grandmother played a very strong role in who he is. So I've seen the influence of the woman being more powerful within the family dynamic, and I see that even today. But again, there are some families where it's the father sets the law of the land, so it can vary from family to family. Now, ideally you want a combination of both parents, and sometimes one parent has more say on certain things and the other parent has more say in other things, right? So it's better to have a balance and not to just put it on one person, like you're the boss and you're the only boss, right?
That's so interesting to put it into context and just share with us your own experience. And yeah, I appreciate that so much, really kind of drawing that line of if we can have some balance in our relationships, especially between parents, whether it's parents or grandparents, especially, that there's those dynamics are fair, or the decision making process, at least for the children that are looking at their parents, looking at their grandparents, can see that it's a fair process, or somewhat balanced in this sense. Like you said, some decisions might be more on one person than another one. That's so interesting. Did any cases come to mind where you've worked with families where that kind of balance has been difficult?
Yeah, absolutely, many times. So I think the functional unit of the family comes down to mom and dad, right? And how that marriage is and how that relationship is, because that's the first relationship that the child is going to observe, right? And in today's day and age, the extended family is not as common as it used to be. So really what the children are exposed to is how mom and dad are interacting with each other, and how balanced is the family through the mother and the father. So the let's just say the fundamental building block comes down to the mom and dad and how their marriage is and how they're conducting their marriage, and then how are they raising their children. So for example, if there is an abusive marriage, then a child is growing up watching abuse, the mother getting abused or the father getting abused, more commonly they see that the mother is getting abused, and then that creates changes in the way in which a child thinks, right? Because that takes away from their feeling of security within their family. So in that way, it really comes down to how are the two people, the parents, functioning. Do they have a healthy relationship or do they have an unhealthy relationship? And then you can trace it even further back to how are they treated when they were children, right? So let's imagine someone sees their mother getting abused all their lives, and that becomes their normal. That's how they grew up. And so eventually, they have the ability. There are a lot of people who grow up watching abuse, but they make a conscious decision. I'm not going to do that in my family. Now that I'm married and I have my own children, we're not going to repeat those things. Versus there are other times where people can just simply repeat the same patterns because that's their normal. So you have to work extra hard to either recreate your normal, or the natural responses that what you grew up with is how you end up, what you pass along. So both can happen. There's a lot of times where people say, this is how I grew up. I'm going to make a conscious decision. This is not going to happen in my life. I'm not going to put my kids through that. And then there's some people who naturally, they say, we tried not to put our kids through this, but this is our normal. And so this is how we ended up treating each other and our family as well. So in my experience as a psychiatrist, when there is a history of abuse and people grow up with abuse, that becomes traumatic for them. And a lot of times we have to work through therapy to help people recover and heal from that trauma. And so that's why I try to really encourage a healthy family dynamic, healthy marriages, healthy upbringing, healthy interaction, and really for moms and dads, to try to have a cohesive, strong, healthy relationship with each other, a respectful relationship with each other, especially in front of their children, so that the kids can feel secure.
Or, I wonder if you can continue on that vein, Sheba, and talk about how parents can really do that on a day-to-day level, on a day-to-day kind of basis. Because as you're saying that the children are watching this all of the time, and I can imagine if they're particularly, maybe when they're younger, they kind of, are like sponges, and they notice everything around them, especially about their parents, and it's kind of creating a kind of template in their mind of life, in the world. So what are some of the things that is a healthy dynamic between husband and wife, let's say?
So husband and wife should not, well, to start, is to have mutual respect, right? So that relationship, before you're even getting married, you should be looking for a soul connection, right? And so that unity, that they have to be unified and very, very cohesive with one another, right? And they shouldn't get into a power struggle with each other, especially in front of the kids, right? So they should understand, like, okay, this is, as in terms of raising our children, I've got this part and you've got that part. I'll handle this and you handle that, because nothing is ever really 50-50 in marriage, right? Sometimes there's 60% one person, 40% the other. Sometimes it's 70% this person and 30% the other. But you would have to be willing to kind of be fluid in nature, right? Like, okay, but in general, together, right, you have to be willing to give up control somewhere. You have to be willing to say, okay, you're my partner in this, so I'm going to give you a little bit more control here, and I'll take a little bit more control there. So now the kids are not getting confused as to, okay, we only listen to mom or we only listen to dad. Mom knows everything, dad doesn't know anything, or dad knows everything, mom doesn't know anything, right? So you have to have mutual respect for each other, and the kids need to be able to see that. Once there's a discrepancy in that and there's some disrespect, the kids will pick up on it immediately. Well, mom said this. Well, dad said this. Well, you didn't say this. And they can easily split between the parents, like, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, or this is the good cop, that's the bad cop, right? So you want to, in a marriage, be able to have mutual respect and understanding. And for that, communication is key. Husbands and wives have to be willing to have conversations with each other. They have to be able to talk about things that are sometimes uncomfortable in nature, and you just have to be able to talk it out. And even if it's an argument, arguments are two-sided and they are a truth-seeking process. So eventually you're saying, okay, we're going to agree to disagree until we come up with a mutual decision together, versus fighting or quarreling, right? So you kind of have to put your thinking caps on, and when you enter a marriage, and you have to say, okay, this is going to be a soul connection, and this is going to be an eternal partnership, and this is how we're going to work together. And we're going to have our ups, we're going to have our downs, but we're going to sit together time to time and do the damage control if there is any damage to be controlled, right? And we're going to sit together and repair things over and over and over again if we need to, because nobody has a perfect life, right? Or a perfect marriage, right? There's no such thing as perfection except for the Almighty, right? So we have to be willing to work with each other's imperfections, and be willing to say, okay, now we've come together and we're going to try to make this a very healthy union, and then we're going to pass it along to our kids so that our kids feel secure.
I wonder if I myself sometimes feel overwhelmed by, I have one child, so bringing up my child, because like you've explained so beautifully, um, I want to have those positive ideas, seeded in her mind about what a loving, caring, respectful relationship is. But it's hard not to feel overwhelmed, or is that just me?
It's very common to feel overwhelmed. It's a lot to balance. And I think that's a very common situation in today's day and age, that moms are feeling overwhelmed. And what's happened is that you're trying your best to give your child, right, the best of you. You want her to see that you're a working woman and that you're successful at that, and that you're also a mom and you're successful at that, and you're also a wife and you're successful at that. So you've got many different roles that you're playing, right, for your daughter. And ultimately you're bringing a perfect being, a child, into an imperfect world. And you,
Yeah.
as a mother, are doing a lot. So a lot of women are having anxiety about these things and are sometimes feeling like, how do we really accomplish this? How do we really do our best? And how do we multitask and we put on all these different hats? And the answer to this is really just that. You do your best and you have to give yourself credit where it's deserved. Don't get into that, or try not to get into that funk that you're not doing enough, because you're already doing a lot more than you think you are. So you have to sit with yourself and you have to say, you know what, did I do my role today? Because you have multiple roles: teacher, mother, daughter, wife, friend, you know, all those roles. So you have to self reflect and you have to say, okay, I think I did justice here, 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 and here, and I'm only one being ultimately. So what I've heard recently is a lot of young moms, when they're going through these feelings, right? They hear from their moms, why is this so hard for you? You know, why is this so difficult? You know, we did it. And they see the things that their moms did and they feel like, why can't we do what our moms were able to do, right? And the reality is that it's a different generation, and you don't see that you may be doing a lot more, right, for what's going on right now in this day and age. So again, what happens is we start comparing ourselves to who did it before us or who else is doing it better. So, you know, be mindful of everything you're doing. And I think what you're, just the fact that you're saying that you want to give these values to your daughter already speaks highly of the fact that you're doing that. And believe it or not, sometimes not everybody realizes that. Not everybody realizes that, you know, not everybody thinks that way. So I think it's important to put things in perspective. Am I letting my daughter know that I want the best for her or not? And if the answer is yes, you're already doing the right thing.
Mm. No. Oh, that's really heartening. Thank you. I wonder if we can move a little bit, staying still with the theme of family, but thinking about women's health a little bit more and how those kind of dynamics that we've been speaking about might impact women's health. So whether those dynamics,
Yeah.
are toxic or negative family dynamics, how that impacts women's health, and obviously the other way around.
Yeah, so in general, anxiety, depression can tend to be more common in women.
Mm.
And women's health is important in every aspect, but nowadays we're seeing postpartum depression, which previously, like I said, a generation before, perhaps they didn't acknowledge that. There are women who have a lot of pressure on them, you know, either to sustain a career and
Mm.
sustain a family, and it's kind of double the pressure. There are a lot of new changes in science and technology in terms of treatment for treatment for fertility. So there's a lot of new changes in women's lives, where a lot of them are going through fertility treatments and people don't know about it, and that can be very emotionally and physically draining, right?
Mm.
So changes have happened. Then there's changes in, again, body image, because now there's certain expectations of how one's physique has to be.
Mm.
So as you know, with time now, women's health, there's a lot of new things that have come up, that perhaps were not happening generations before us, right? So there's a lot more happening along with the premenstrual symptoms. Then there's pregnancy, then there's postpartum, then there's fertility treatment. So there's a lot of new things that are happening that are not necessarily new. It doesn't mean that they didn't happen before, but now at least we're acknowledging that these are things that may require treatment. So it's, again, for me, women's health has always been an area of interest. Again, myself being a woman coming from a very female oriented family. I have three sisters. So again, it's important to maintain your own mental health and your own mental hygiene, right? To be able to do all of that. Like I said, you have different roles. You have your professional role, you have your personal role, you have your maternal role, you have your daughter role, you have, and a lot of times for women who are married, they have the expectations from their in-laws, is she not doing a good enough job in the kitchen? Is she not? And how did they expect their kids to be raised? Then there's the other aspect where some women who are professionals and they're not married at the age criteria that the cultural norms are expecting them to get married at. And so that becomes pressure for them, right? Like people coming up to them in social settings. When are you getting married? How come you haven't found somebody yet? When are you having a baby? How come you haven't started a family yet? Why do you just have one child? Why don't you have three or four yet? So these are pressures that are coming harder. The people who do this more to ladies than they do to men. And there's very few men that are having these issues where that kind of pressure exists. I can't say that very few, they're having it too, but it's culturally, it's being commonly, like I feel that women get asked these questions more often. And so it's important for us to be able to understand and empathize and be supportive, and especially of each other as women, and to not sort of put that pressure on each other and ask those sorts of questions, right? Like a lot of times culturally, I come from a South Asian background, and people, ladies in a ladies' party won't even hesitate to say, if someone's put on weight or if they've lost weight, they are very comfortable in saying these things, right? So you have to be careful, because a lot of times you don't know what the other person's struggle is. And if someone's already going through depression, someone's already going through PTSD, someone already has anxiety, those words can be really toxic. And if they get internalized, it can exacerbate and worsen the situation.
Absolutely. I really want to touch a little bit more on what you said about women supporting other women. Is there anything that comes to mind about the work that you've done with patients or families where you've seen that happen successfully or otherwise that you could share with us?
Well, I do a lot of community service and community mental health awareness, where I give a lot of talks and lectures about creating healthy family dynamics, healthy social interactions with one another. So I try to encourage and perpetuate a healthy social life for people and a healthy family life. So the reason being is that along with your genetics, along with your medical, history, there's a psychological and social component to your mental health. And so what happens socially does affect your mental health. What happens psychologically, whether it's childhood trauma or trauma within your family, that affects your mental health. So I try to educate the community about how to create healthier family environment and a social environment, so that you can have a better mental health. If, to be honest with you, I do think that there are a lot of support networks for women now. I encourage group therapy, book clubs, creating healthy avenues to have intellectual conversations, intellectual discussions with one another, so that you can have a better support system. And when you realize that somewhere someone is being toxic, whether it's in the family or outside of the family, you set boundaries. You set boundaries where you say, you know what, this person's words affected my feelings and my mood and how I feel about myself. And I can't control their words, but I can control how I feel. So I'm going to set some limits with this person so that I'm not constantly exposed to their negativity. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to be able to identify in a social setting where you're feeling uplifted and where you're feeling down. And for the places and the people that are making you feel worse,
Mm.
you need to set some boundaries. And then the question is, what if that's your family member, right? What if that's your mother-in-law, or if that's your sister, or if that's your sister-in-law? How do you set boundaries with family? Well,
Yeah.
ultimately, we're all human beings. So you can maintain that mutual respect of a family, but that doesn't mean that you can take the abuse and the negativity. So you have to at some times set limits. Okay, I will interact with them for this purpose. However, I'm not going to get too close so that all their opinions come out and then you internalize it and get depressed later. So you have to set mental boundaries for yourself, and it's okay to do that. A lot of people feel like, how could I do that? There might, and you're not cutting anyone off. You're just protecting your own mental health. That's all it is.
Absolutely. And I think also perhaps acknowledging that it's not always um abusive comments like you mentioned, or something even more severe. It could be less, in the sense that maybe that person is just negative about life in general. It could just be other comments or things that are not even necessarily directed towards you, but I think you can, once you've spent enough time with someone, know that actually maybe they are somebody that you want to spend some hours with, like you mentioned, but not all of the time. It doesn't necessarily need to be abuse. You agree?
Yeah, exactly. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be abuse. I think that's a strongest version of that, right? It
Yeah.
can just be a comment that's not meant to be abusive in nature. It can be said in a very innocent way or a benign way, but depending on someone's situation, it may affect someone differently. So the way the mind works is that your thoughts affect your feelings, and your
Yeah.
feelings affect your mood, and your mood affects your behavior, right? So what you're thinking is going to affect how you feel, and then that manifests as your mood, and then that is what changes your behavior or dictates your behavior. So it's kind of like you have to be willing to ask yourself. Now, your thoughts consist of words, right? Like it's a narrative that your mind is playing to you, and it uses words. So if you're exposing yourself to negative words frequently, then that's what your mind is hearing and processing, those negative words. So you have to be willing to say, okay, I will now try to change that negativity in my mind, and I will change the way I think, and then I will change the way I speak, and then I will change the way I behave. And those are the principles of
Yeah.
cognitive behavioral therapy, is that we think about our thoughts, and we intentionally and consciously think, if this is a negative thought, I'm going to change this negative thought, and we're going to move forward from that so that we feel differently.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for breaking that down, because it makes so much sense if you're able to, as you say, um, change that narrative by talking to yourself. When you know that there's some kind of thought or something there that actually you would like to change, you can do that. You
Right.
can go about that, and whether that you know i- is something that you try by yourself, or you go and see a therapist to help you with that. It's just about thinking about our health, and that actually leads me really nicely onto my next question about women's health, and whether you think that, in terms of your experience, have you um met women, and has it given you this notion perhaps that women don't care about their health so much?
I'm not sure that they don't care. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of, like I said, compartmentalizing the different roles that they have. And again, the emotional part of the family usually lies on the woman. And at least historically speaking, culturally speaking, a lot of people, for example, I did a talk on family dynamics, and I interviewed uh, dozens and dozens of women, and they felt, majority of them felt that they held the responsibility of the emotions and the values and the feelings of the family, right? So that's a huge responsibility to hold. Whereas The men were expected to manage the finances and just support the household with the monetary needs, and the women were expected to sustain the household with the emotional needs. And so that's a very heavy responsibility. And again, you have to be willing to say, or look inside yourself and say, where are my own emotions coming from?
Mm.
Because if I'm holding this responsibility for my entire family, what is my behavior like? How do I feel about myself? So let's imagine a woman who is a toxic person, okay, who never feels good, who's never happy with life, who's never happy with anyone. And then their expectation is with their kids, you have to make me happy. And all of their spouses, all her children and her grandchildren, everybody has to make me happy. It's about me. And if you can't make me happy, you're no good. So now that toxicity is going to trickle down to the entire family. But if you think about it logically, that woman is keeping control of the emotions of the entire family, right? So you have to be willing to say, as a woman, should I have that responsibility of controlling everybody's emotions and moral compass, or are there other people that play a role in this too? And I think it's a dual relationship, again, husband, wife, man, woman, they both have to contribute. A boy or a girl, if you have a daughter, your daughter should not just view the world from your lens. She also has to know her father's perspective of this world. She also has to know, how's dad's day going, how is dad functioning from a day-to-day basis. So it's his perspective and your perspective. And in single parent households, that can still happen, where it's not, even if there is no father or if there is no mother, there are other ways of showing your child that there's other aspects to just my own single way of thinking. So you have to be, as a woman, you have to be introspective, and you have to say, if I'm holding all this emotional responsibility for my family, I have to be healthy emotionally myself. And I have to see, what am I giving down? So there's a lot of very wise women that I've interviewed that say, look, we stay happy, especially in front of our kids, so that they learn how to stay happy as well. We're good to our kids, and we know our kids are good to us. And they reciprocate goodness, kindness, gestures that are full of love and affection, because they know that if I'm the source, I'm up at the top of this pyramid. And so if I give, it'll get reciprocated. And they're not necessarily doing this so that they get the return. They're doing this so that their kids can have a healthy family life themselves. So, I gave the example of the toxic woman, but there's also the opposite of that. There's also very, very wise women who are sustaining their families with a lot of love and compassion, and they have a good partnership with their spouse. And even if they don't have a spouse, they just have a lot of love and comfort to give to their children. And so at some place you have to ask, okay, well, are they receiving it from their own kids, or where are they getting it from? And there's things, there's people pray, there's spirituality, there's exercise, there's self-care. So you have to do things to make sure you're healthy yourself, and in order to share that with the family.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You've already kind of touched upon what I wanted to ask about, all about how women can begin to take care of themselves and ways that they can um, really go on that journey of well-being and maintaining it as well, which is what you've mentioned. So thank you. Things that you mentioned in terms of whether it's exercise or taking some time out, or going for a walk, or reading a book, or doing things that we really enjoy in ourselves, to make sure that we're mentally healthy and our well-being is good, so that we can give it to to our loved ones around us. I guess we're coming up to the final questions in our podcast, but before we do that, I did want to ask if there were any case studies that come to mind that you wanted to share in particular today.
Sure. I just wanted to add to what you had asked me prior to, before I share a case study,
Of course.
is that along with those things that you reiterated, I want to advise women, or at least bring to your attention, be careful who you take advice from, right? Because a lot of times as women, we like to talk about our feelings. right? And you have that go-to person that you pick up the phone and you want to call, or you want to vent, or you want to talk to. And so, as much that's healthy, but you have to be careful as to what advice you are taking, and what kind of advice, who is the person who's giving you advice. So for example, some people say, they have the person that they go to on TikTok or Instagram, or their social media, which is fine. But you want to make sure you know that that person is a credible source to take advice from. So that's something to be mindful of as well. And so, having said that, I can share with you, a scenario of and then again, I'm not going to just state one person in particular, but in general, there are families right now who are experiencing that at some point, one family member, let's imagine in a family where there's uh, parents, and there's grandparents, and there's grandchildren, right? And so there comes a point in a person's life where their parents are aging. And so at that point, you have to sort of take care of your aging parents, because there's a reversal of roles. And then you're also taking care of your children. So that becomes a dual responsibility now. And so I want to bring to attention that that is a sensitive time for each adult when they're experiencing that, because they're used to being comforted by their parents, and now the parents are aging, and their mind is not functioning at the same way that it used to. So you have to understand that that in itself is a change for you. And so you have to be willing to get support for that, that what, this dynamic has changed. And then at the same time, you have your own kids that you have to take care of. And so I'm finding that a lot of people in that middle age, right, in that middle age group, they're struggling because they're trying to maintain and sustain the relationship with their parents and their children, but they're kind of in this unfamiliar territory. And so for that, it's important to seek support of community members, right? And so community members should be able to come up with ways to facilitate and help elderly people, as well as the youth, as well as the middle age. So we can't just be stuck with thinking for one generation. We can't just think of my generation, your generation, or just the youth. We have to think of our parents as well. And how do we take care of them as they're aging? How do we take care of them as they're going through mental and physical changes? How are we able to do that? And so the community needs to get together and have these support systems, support groups, and a supportive environment. Because again, the lifespan of people has changed, right? From decades ago to now as well. So we have to be willing to see that these changes in the family will happen. And now the extended family is not as common, at least in the United States. It's not as common as it used to be, where parents, children, grandchildren are all living under one roof. So you have to be willing to create avenues on how to sustain healthy relationship with the generation before you, the generation after you, as well as your generation.
Absolutely. And Shiva, you've already touched on my question in terms of what you'd like to share with women who might be struggling, or families who are struggling with the family dynamics. But was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
So there's two other common things that I've been asked actually to talk about many, many times. One is women are now feeling a lot of peer pressure to kind of keep up with whatever they're seeing, So if there's a party here, or social gathering here, a social gathering there, should they be a part of that? Why weren't they a part of it? And so they're kind of going through this fear of missing out, while they're mothering, while they're parenting, while they're working, while they're perhaps looking to get married, while they're looking to start a family. There's also this social pressure that they're experiencing. And for that, again, I want them to be introspective, and I want them to think, where are you at your life? How important is it to be a part of those? And again, who is it that you're trying to fit into? Is this a person who's thinking intellectually, spiritually, and you want to aspire to be like in some way, and you want to be in their company? What is the reason why you're craving this? So you want to be introspective about that. Okay. So that's one piece of advice, is when you're looking for companionship, even amongst each other, look to people that you feel happy around, and you don't feel the pressure of being a certain way. You want to be comfortable, and you want it to be a safe and supportive environment. Okay, so that's one common thing that I'm hearing a lot, and I've been asked to talk about a lot. The other is, I think, a common, and I don't know if this is a cultural thing or not, but a lot of people have a difficult time balancing their dynamics with their in-laws, and that affects their marriage. And I think the key there is to compartmentalize. Your marriage is a separate entity from your in-laws. You and your husband proactively have to work together on your marriage, and you do not let anyone on the outside infiltrate that marriage. That includes your parents, his parents, that includes your children. So in your marriage, it should be two people in a marriage. You don't let the kids infiltrate and interfere in that relationship. You don't let the in-laws from this side or that side. You don't let work. You don't let anything interfere with that. You have to keep a very secure and solid marriage. And for people who are not married and who are looking to get married, that is what they should aspire to look for in a person. Is this going to be a soulmate and a companion for me that I can problem solve with for anything that comes at us in life? And so you have to look for the intellectual compatibility. And I know for a lot of people, looks are very important, and money is important, and the title is very important, but you got to dig a little bit deeper. You always have to dig deeper. So when you are looking for a soulmate, make sure you're thinking, is this a good person for me to get through the challenges of life with, right? Through the ups and downs. So again, my advice to women, especially that are married, is keep your marriage a priority in your life. And same thing for women who are looking to get married. It is that when you are looking for a soulmate, you have to think intellectually, is this person going to be there for me, through thick and thin? And for people who are single, well, women who are single and prefer to remain single, when you are in a social environment, is that a healthy social environment for you or not? Are you taking enough care of yourself or not? So you have to make sure you prioritize your own mental health.
Amazing.
I hope
Dr.
that
Sheeba,
helps. It's a long answer.
No, it was fantastic. And I think you covered so many bases, which are so, so important in and of themselves. So thank you so much again. I wondered if there was anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't touch upon today. But other than that, I think it's been a wonderful conversation today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and it's been an honor to speak with you. And I hope this helps.
Thank you so much again. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Jazakallah khair for watching this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast with Dr. Sheeba Rahman, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.